So welcome everyone to the Palestine Program for Health and Human Rights webinar. I'm Osama Tannous and I'm one of the co-directors of the program. I wanted to start with a few logistical announcements before passing it on to our incredible panel we have today. So we want this discussion to be as interactive as possible. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit questions throughout the panel. We will have a significant time for questions, so not that we usually receive much more questions than we can address, but we will try to kind of tackle as much as possible. Your questions are only visible to the speakers and cannot be seen by other attendees. A small reminder that our speakers' remarks are based on their own scholarship and experiences. As such, they speak for themselves and not for Harvard University. And with that, I will pass it on to our panel moderator, Dr. Ayesha Kadir. Dr. Kadir is a pediatrician and a public health consultant. She works in clinical care, public health research, health policy, and advocacy. And her clinical work in pediatric emergency medicine and social pediatrics in Europe and humanitarian settings. Her research, advocacy, and policy work focuses on the effects of migration, armed conflict, and other forms of violence on children and families, and in finding effective ways to protect and promote children's and families' health, well-being, and rights. Over to you, Dr. Qadir.
Thank you, Osama. Dr. Tanous, I should say. I would like to start with just a few sort of remarks on the general situation before handing over to our esteemed panelists. So, this war is unlike any other war in its intensity and the way in which it's waged. We've seen extraordinary levels of bombing, including indiscriminate bombing, targeting of children, and targeting of health workers. And attacks have decimated the major infrastructure that supports basic needs for civilians, including shelter, water and sanitation, food, hospitals, clinics, and schools. And a study published in The Lancet last month estimated 64,260 people died during the first 9 months of the war from traumatic injuries alone. This is 41% higher than the reported mortality from the Ministry of Health in Gaza. And 59% of these deaths were in children, women, and the elderly. In the study, it gives us an idea of the scale and the intensity of the violence and similarities with other genocides, but any humanitarian health worker will know that this is only a fraction of the actual deaths from this violence, because it doesn't include all the people who died from illness, lack of basic human needs like food, water, and sanitation, and lack of access to health care. At present, only 1 in 10 people are able to access safe drinking water. And the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs situation report from yesterday, 11th of March, indicates the widespread presence of explosive ordnance throughout Gaza. And the Gaza Protection Cluster reported in January that in the calendar year 2024, an average of 15 children suffered potentially disabling injuries from explosive ordnance every single day. Since the beginning of the war, there have been repeated reports of the 6 grave violations against children in conflict. These violations are the worst things that can be done to children. They include the killing and maiming of children, recruitment and use of children by armed forces and armed groups, sexual violence against children, abduction of children, attacks on schools and hospitals, and the denial of humanitarian access. Attacks on children in Palestine have been occurring for a very long time. In 1948, there was a violent displacement of more than 700,000 Palestinians from their homes and their lands. And since then, there have been recurrent conflicts. There have been 5 wars since 2008. Or if you think of it another way, adolescents that are 16 years old today have experienced 5 wars in their short lifetime. And if that wasn't enough, Gaza has also been under siege for nearly 18 years throughout the time that these 5 wars have taken place. So in this current war, a ceasefire took effect on the 19th of January. But since the 2nd of March, and now for the 11th consecutive day, the entry of all humanitarian and commercial supplies into Gaza has been halted by the Israeli authorities. Today, we will hear and discuss about the ways in which children have been specifically harmed by this war and what this means for them. We have three panelists who will focus respectively on the physical harms, psychological impacts, and the violation of their basic human rights. So for everyone listening, please do write questions and comments in the chat, and we will discuss these in the Q&A session after the panelists have given brief talks. A couple of our panelists have to leave slightly early. Budour will be leaving on the hour, so in just 50 minutes. So if you have specific questions for her or about human rights, if you could prioritize them or make note of that earlier on, that would be great. So it's an honor for me to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Mimi Syed. Dr. Syed is an emergency medicine physician and an assistant clinical professor at the University of Washington and Washington State University. She is a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians, and she provided healthcare in Gaza from August 8th to September 5th, 2024, and again, December 3rd to December 31st, 2024, both times at Al-Aqsa Hospital and Nasser Hospital. So Mimi, Dr. Syed, over to you.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am Dr. Mimi Syed. I actually returned recently in January after my second medical mission. I'm going to try to share the screen here. Let's see. Can you just let me know if you can see that, Ayesha?
Yep, I can see it.
Great. Yes, and I just wanted to say a little bit about the content that I will be presenting is quite graphic, as some pictures. So just a heads up for the viewers. The pictures are personal property, and they were all taken by me or on my iPhone. Yeah, I'll just get right into it here. So I wanted to start out by just sharing what we saw, who the patients were. Most of our patients were women and children. We saw over 70% women and children, and this was actually a number that was published by UN. And personally, in August, when I tallied up my numbers, I saw about 86% women and children, mostly children. The types of injuries we saw were shrapnel injuries, burns, and explosive injuries. Those were the most common. And as you can see in these pictures, all of them are children or women, and in obviously very critical injuries. Some of the injuries that we did see, though, were very unusual, and I wanted to bring these up because all of my colleagues have witnessed these type of injuries, which are single gunshot wounds to the head and to the chest, to the abdomen. We all saw this. I saw this every single day, multiple times a day, small children under the age of 12 with gunshot wounds to the head. Most of these children would arrive dead. Most of them never even made it to a CT scan, like these three unfortunate babies here. They all came in with single shots to the head, dead on arrival. And it was common practice for us to ask the people bringing them in what happened. And they would always say either quadcopter or snipers, that these children were shot with a quadcopter or a sniper. Like I said, this is a very unnatural thing to witness. It's not something you commonly see. In the US, if I were to see this, it would usually be a crossfire or a drive-by. And it wouldn't be very often. And if we saw it in the United States, if a child showed up in the United States in my emergency department, the entire law enforcement agency would be investigating why this happened to a child and who did this to a child. Unfortunately, in Gaza, this is extremely common and is seen all the time. And you can see these CT scans and X-ray. These are children with bullets in their head and their neck. These children were fortunate enough to survive to make it to the CT scan, but like in the previous slide, most of them did not. I wanted to talk about the living conditions in Gaza because they are horrific, deplorable, not compatible with human life, as Dr. Ayesha mentioned. These are pictures of, you can see basically a landfill. There's trash everywhere. There is no sewage system. This child playing here in the center is playing in sewage. This is not water. And this is very common. It's running through the roads and it's obviously contaminating the water. And the water itself is extremely contaminated with very high levels of E. coli and salt. This is seawater. The fuel that's needed in order to purify this water is blocked from entering by the Israeli government. The chlorine that's needed to clean the water of E. coli is blocked from entering Gaza. So the levels are extremely high. We saw high rates of kidney failure in children, higher rates than I've ever seen in my entire career or even heard of. And a lot of it is due to the water sanitation or the water contamination, and also the high levels of salt. I remember a 9-month-old child that I saw in the emergency department that came in with diarrhea, recurrent diarrhea. Eventually, he succumbed to his illness. He died of kidney failure, multi-organ failure, and gastrointestinal bleeding, because every time he would come in, he would get resuscitated and go right back to these deplorable conditions in the tent. Again, extremely preventable, not necessary at all, but is so common in Gaza to see this. And not to mention the malnourishment. Proper nutrition is not allowed into Gaza. The amount of calories per child, per person is not even close to being enough. I saw mothers with newborn babies feeding their babies sugar water, and their children coming in with failure to thrive because they just could not survive. The miscarriage rate is about 300% right now. If you're a woman in Gaza, you have a 300% chance of having a miscarriage rate. That is incredibly high. It's almost like unfathomable. Women would come in frequently with preterm labor, and as a result, have children with cerebral palsy and other lifelong illnesses that are totally preventable. In the next slide here, I have the hospitals. I was stationed at 2 different hospitals at 2 different times of the year for 4 weeks at a time. I was in and out of the hospital. I had access to all parts of the hospital. We spoke to the locals there. We worked at all hours. Never in my time there or any of my colleagues who I've spoken to, never did we witness military combatants' weapons. We never even saw injured combatants come in. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because this excuse has been used by the Israeli military to completely bombard and destroy the healthcare system, to bomb hospitals with the excuse and justification that there are militants inside and that there are fighters inside. And we simply never saw this happen. And I'm speaking from firsthand witness. I just never saw it. Neither time that I was there in different hospitals that I was there in. And I just wanted to, stress a point that children deserve safety and peace, and they deserve basic human rights, and that's just not happening in Gaza right now. Simple things that are being, blocked from entering with the recent, after 43 days of ceasefire, with this threat of constantly resuming fire, now electricity, which is absolutely necessary for the purification of the water, is now again completely blocked. I'm speaking to the doctors at the hospitals currently that send me messages. The babies in the PICU, in the NICU, are at high imminent death just because there is no fuel to support the hospital and the life-saving measures that these children need. Again, it's going to lead to catastrophic diseases and deaths that are completely unnecessary and preventable. Children deserve safety, not death and destruction. A common thing in Gaza is that as a child, you see other children and their own family members dying around them. The mental and physical health issues that are completely exponentially and disproportionately affecting children right now. I want to stress that this can be minimized. It can stop. If this is all, if we can get to a peaceful resolution, if unlimited aid can be allowed in and a sustained ceasefire is honored, then this can all stop and we can prevent these unnecessary deaths. All of these children here died in these pictures. These are sisters on the left side that came in with just devastating injuries, multi-limb amputations, facial trauma, and burns. This child in the center was shot in the head. He's laying there in his vomit. He died shortly after this picture. And the child on the right is a 9-month-old that came in diapers still and also succumbed to her injuries. All of the above that I've discussed today these are manufactured life-threatening conditions by the Israeli government. If the rules of the ceasefire, the agreements of the ceasefire were allowed, this could all have been prevented after the ceasefire agreement went through. The impunity that the Israeli government has needs to stop. Unfortunately, the Western media is completely complicit in perpetuating this rhetoric that there is impunity, and it absolutely needs to end. These are dangerous, this is a dangerous precedent to set for the rest of the world. With ceasefire now, what needs to be done? I want to stress that just because there is a ceasefire, that does not mean that the work is ended. The work has just begun. There is a widespread destruction that was caused by the Israeli military, and it's not only led to the death of the healthcare system in Gaza, but it's also exacerbated the public health issues that were there before, particularly with the lack of clean water and inadequate sanitation. The recovery is going to require substantial international support, and most of all, sustained and permanent ceasefire with unlimited amount of aid allowed to enter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Syed. This was really important to share these images, and I can see already from the Q&A that people are asking how we can share this more widely. But we will take questions. We will discuss questions at the end of the three presentations from speakers. So I would like to now introduce our next panelist, who is Mr. Mohammad Mansour. He's a psychotherapist and specializes in treating traumas and sexual assault victims and emergency interventions. He's a co-founder and mental health consultant for Humanity Crew, and he's been a volunteer with Physicians for Human Rights in the West Bank and Gaza since 2002. He'll be speaking about the effect of the attacks on children's mental health here, and we'll open the conversation to discussing the attacks on children and how this affects children in other ways than the physical injuries that we can see and illnesses that we see in their bodies. Mr. Mansour will speak and he'll present in Arabic, and Dr. Osama Tanous will provide translation into English. So we will have both English and Arabic available. Yeah, Mohammed, over to you.
Thank you. Excuse me for the Arabic speak because after one day of Ramadan to speak in English, it's not easy. So I will begin my introduction. مداخلتي راح يتقاطع فيها الشخصي والمهني مع بعض، لأنه ما بقدر أجي أحط أكثر من 16 سنة تعيد تطوع لإلي مع أطباء لحقوق الإنسان في غزة، وفي خلال السنوات هاي كان في إلي كثير علاقات مع أشخاص، أصدقاء، زملاء، مع عائلاتهم، فما بقدر أحطها على جنب في مداخلتي.
So my comments will include also the personal and the professional together, because I cannot summarize 16 years of work and of volunteering with the mobile clinic of Physicians for Human Rights that includes many encounters with friends and colleagues and patients and separate the personal from the professional in a small comment.
في هدول السنوات أنا اللي عملته اللي اشتغلت فيه هو غير التدريبات المهنية للمهنيين في قلب غزة، هو كمان تدخل مباشر مع عائلات بالذات في قلب مخيمات في جنوب قطاع غزة. وهناك عرفت عائلات بشكل شخصي، أكلت من أكلهن، فرحت لفرحهن وبكيت على وجعهن.
Mm. So throughout my years of work and volunteer, I've also trained psychologists and healthcare workers, but also did direct interventions within families, mainly in refugee camps in the south of the Gaza Strips, where I was very much involved in their daily lives, in their happy moment. I shared their food, I shared their happy moments, I shared their sad moments together, and was very much embedded in their community.
في هاي الحرب الملعونة أنا فقدت كثير أصدقاء، ومن بيناتهم زميلنا الاختصاصي النفسي وليد المحلاوي، هو أطفاله الثلاثة وزوجته، اللي في زيارتي الأخيرة لغزة كنت في بيته، شربت من قهوته ولعبت وضحكت مع أطفاله.
So, in this damned war, I've lost many colleagues and friends, including the psychologist Dr. Walid Mhallawi himself and his family and three kids. And he's a precious friend that I've spent many times in his home, sharing food and coffee and like talking and working together.
في خلال هاي الحرب أنا تابعت من بداية الحرب كثير عائلات وكثير أشخاص اللي أنا في علاقة معهم، تابعتهم بدعم نفسي من خلال معرفتي لإلهن، بالإضافة لعملي في مؤسسة الهيومانيتي كرو اللي في لنا مشروع لدعم العاملين في مؤسسات دعم نفسي للعاملين في بعض المؤسسات اللي موجودين في غزة اللي بيشتغلوا مباشرة مع الناس.
Hmm. So throughout the war, while I couldn't physically enter Gaza, I continued working online with families that I've known before and worked with them before, and also while working with Humanity Crew and supporting organizations that provide mental health support.
راح أعرض الآن معنى وعمق الصدمة النفسية بالذات عند الأطفال في غزة من خلال حالة اللي راح أعرضها عليكم.
So I will present the meaning and the depth of the mental trauma and its effects on children throughout the case study that I will present.
سلوى طفلة عمرها 6 سنوات،
Mm.
التقيت فيها وبأخوها عمر قبل كثير سنين، من لما كانت طفلة كثير صغيرة، من أول ما ولدت بعرفها. أخوها اللي أكبر منها بسنة بسنتين التقيت فيهن في بيتهن، في بيت نسميه بيت في بركية،
Mm.
في واحدة من المخيمات اللي موجودة في غزة اللي هو مخيم نهر البارد.
Mm. So Salwa is a 6-year-old girl who I've met her and her brother Omar. I know her since she was born, basically in one of their in their you might call it home or a small unit in the Nahr al-Barid refugee camp.
من أول الحرب وأنا أحاول بالذات لسلوى وبالذات لأخوها عمر إني أخفف الضغط النفسي عنهن، لإلهن ولأمهن ولأبوهن اللي بعرفهن كتير منيح وبعلاقة قوية معهن وكانت كل الوقت أبوها يضل يقول لي، أبوها محمد الله يرحمه، كان يضل يقول لي ضحكة سلوى هي اللي بتخلينا واقفين على رجلينا.
So throughout the war, I tried to keep in contact with Salwa and Omar and their parents, and try as much as possible to relieve stress and help them cope with the stress of the war. And her father, may he rest in peace, would always say that the smile and laughter of Salwa is the only thing that keeps us on our feet.
سلوى كانت كل ما يصير فيه قصف تقريبا كل يوم بالليل بالأساس دغري تقوم وتقعد تروح عند أبوها عند أمها وعند عمر وتبوس بروسهن وتروح عند عمر وتحضنه.
So whenever there would be bombing, mainly in the night, Salwa would go to her parents and her brother Omar and just hug them and kiss their heads.
أبوها بالأساس كان يقول لي هي لماها، كان كلياتنا انهارنا، كان كلياتنا ما ضل فينا روح.
Her father would say that if it wasn't for her, for Salwa, we would have all just collapsed mentally. We would have our spirit would have been broken if it wasn't for Salwa and what she brings to the house.
قبل 5 أشهر بالذات في 12 أكتوبر الماضي انقصف البيت تاحن. استشهد محمد أبوها أبو عمر، واستشهد عمر.
So a few months ago, on the 12th of October 24, their house was bombed and her father and her brother were martyred.
لحوالي شهر سلوى كانت ترفض إنها تحكي مع أي حدا، ترفض تحكي معي. أتواصل مع أمها وهي ترفض تحكي معها. لما تسمع صوتي بحكي مع أمها تقعد تبكي وتقول لأمها هذا اللي بذكرني بعمر.
Mm. So for over a month, Salwa wouldn't speak to anyone, and she completely refused to speak to him, to Muhammad, and say that I don't want to speak with him. When he would call her mom on the phone, saying that he reminds me of my father, reminds me of Omar. I don't want to speak with him.
من شهر هيك، من نص نوفمبر، سلوى بلشت هيك تقبل إنها تتواصل معي، وصارت تفتح الكاميرا عقبالي، وبطلت أشوف سلوى اللي عارفها.
Since the mid-November, Salwa did agree to start speaking to me, and she did open the camera, but it wasn't the same Salwa that I have known before.
الضحك اختفت، ملامح وجهها صارت زي ملامح وجهي أنا، زي ملامح وجهي الكبار بالعمر. آه،
Her face, the way she looks, her facial expressions have completely disappeared. She lost the look of a child and started looking like me, like an adult.
وكل الوقت، كل الوقت ضل كوابيس بالليل، تحكي لي عن كوابيس اللي تجيها بالليل. بتحكي لي انه كل الوقت مع صحيح وصار وقف اطلاق نار، بالذات وقف بعد وقف اطلاق النار، بتقول لي بس انا كل الوقت بسمع القصف، وكل الوقت بسمع صراخ عمر وصراخ ابوي وهن عم بموتوا.
And she would talk about the continuous nightmares that she has all the time. She kept on having nightmares, and even when there was ceasefire, she continued hearing the bombing and hearing the cries of her father and of her brother as they were dying, and their shouting and noise.
في واحد من المحادثات اللي كانت قبل كم يوم، سلوى بتقول لي صحيح عمو القصف توقف، بس براسي ما توقف، بعد الطيارات بتقصف هون، بعده عمر وبعده أبوي بيموتوا كل يوم.
So, in one of our recent talks just a few days ago, she said, although there is no bombing right now, but in my head, in my awareness, the planes are still bombing every day. In my head, my father and my brother are dying every day.
بكثير لقاءات معها، أنا تقريبا على الأقل مرة بالأسبوع بلتقي معها على على الواتساب فيديو، وكل لقاء مع كثير لقاءات معها هي هيك بتبقى سارحة، مش معنا كليا. بتبقى موجودة في كأنها موجودة في عالم آخر بالفراغ، بتسرح باللا شيء.
I meet her almost once a week, and in all of those meetings, she's just staring into the void, just like staring to the horizon, with nothing, not really keeping an eye contact, always wondering and not concentrated.
حاولت بكل جهدي، بكل معرفتي المهنية اللي بتمد لأكثر من 30 سنة بالصدمات النفسية، حاولت أسترجع البسمة تعيد سلوى، لحد إسا فشلت فشل ذريع.
So I have over 30 years of experience with dealing with trauma, and I've tried all of my tools to make her regain her smile, to make her smile again, but I have completely failed in bringing back the smile on her face.
مم. بتردد السؤال بالفترة الأخيرة عندها، بتضل تقول لي ليش إحنا عايشين؟ وين أنا بدي أروح عند عمر؟
Mm. Recently, she keeps on asking me, why am I still alive? When will I go to see Omar, my brother?
سلوى هي بس مثال صغير لمئات آلاف الأطفال اللي موجودين في غزة وبيعيشوا هاي الصدمة، اللي لحد إسا علم الصدمة النفسية ما كتب في أدبياته عن قديش عمق ومعنى هاي الصدمة اللي موجودة.
So Salwa is just an example of probably hundreds of thousands of children that are experiencing daily traumas in Gaza. That the entire literature of trauma uh, has failed to kind of even capture what they are going through, let alone deal with it.
للأسف موضوع التدخلات النفسية بالذات للأطفال ما عم بنطرح على الطاولة بشكل كثيف كيف بتنطرح المساعدات الطبية والإغاثة، لأنه الإغاثة النفسية هي إشي كثير أساسي بالذات بالنسبة للأطفال في غزة اليوم.
Mm. So, mental health intervention is extremely important to children in Gaza today, and unfortunately, it is not being put on the table. It's not being centralized in the discussions. Like of course, humanitarian aid is very important, and medical aid, and so on. But mental health intervention is of extreme importance right now, and it's not taking the importance it deserves.
بفكر إنه المرحلة الأولى والأساسية اللي لازم نبدأ فيها حاليا بموضوع الصدمات النفسية هو الدعم لزملائنا المهنيين بالصحة النفسية في قلب غزة، لأنهن هن كمان في وضع نفسي اللي حسب رأيي وأنا بلتقي وبشوف وبسمع الكثير منهن في وضع نفسي لا يسمح لهن إنهن يساعدوا الآخرين، فالدعم لإلهن في هاي المرحلة هو كثير ضروري، وإن نكثف جهودنا لتكثيف الدعم النفسي في قلب غزة وبالذات للأطفال هو إشي كثير أساسي. ولما أحكي دعم نفسي بقصد بالأساس الدعم النفسي المهني، مش الفعاليات اللي بتنعمل بشكل يومي مع الأطفال في كل المحلات في غزة، لأنه هاي غير كافية.
So I think at this moment we should prioritize our help and support to the mental health workers of in Gaza, because they themselves are completely traumatized and shattered, and they do not have the ability to continue doing what they do and treating children. So I mean, besides the daily activities that are happening with children in Gaza, we should really prioritize helping our colleagues and mental health colleagues in Gaza.
أنا بشكل شخصي كنت متردد هل أنا قادر، كمان أنا اللي موجود هون لكن أعتبر نفسي، بما أني أعتبر نفسي نصف غزاوي والألم تاعهن هو عم بشعره، عم بسأل نفسي كثير مرات هل أنا نفسيا كمهني عندي القدرة اليوم إني أقدر أعمل هذا الدعم؟
So even though like I don't live in Gaza right now, but I consider myself half Gazan. I know the people of Gaza very much, and although I haven't experienced the war as they have, I continue questioning myself. Do I even have the tools and the ability to provide them with mental health support and trauma treatment?
بقدرش أفصل حالي لا عن وجع سلمى، ولا عن الوجع اللي عاشه عمر قبل ما مات، ولا عن وجع أسيل، ولا عن وجع كل أصدقائي الأطفال اللي كنت ألعب معهم بالطابة بالمخيمات. لا يعني مستحيل إنه نقدر نفصل نفسنا عن هذا المحل.
So I cannot separate myself from the pain of Salma and Asil and Omar and all the kids that I've known throughout my work in Gaza, and I used to play with them with the football and so on. So and none of us can who've been to Gaza can kind of separate and isolate ourselves from the pain of the people of Gaza, and that's what makes it harder to kind of treat or try to provide mental health.
وبالنهاية بقول إنه أمامنا سنوات طويلة للعمل بالمجال الصحي، بالمجال النفسي، بالمجال الإغاثي، في جميع المجالات، لأنه لما نحكي عن كارثة لم تحدث بالتاريخ من قبل، كارثة إنسانية لم تحدث بالتاريخ من قبل. فتكثيف جهودنا جميعا ودعمنا لبعض عشان نقدر ندعم أهلنا هناك، هاي القضية الضرورية. وهون بنهي المداخلة تاعيتي وشكرا لكم.
And towards the end, I want to say that we have many years to come where we need to really strengthen our also ourselves and our ability to support our people in Gaza, because what they are going to, what they have gone through, and what they have gone through, what they are continuing to go through, is a tragedy and a catastrophe that has not seen a similar scale in modern history, and how catastrophic and traumatizing it is. So we have many, many years to come in order to rebuild and reconstruct also the medical system in Gaza, but also the mental health system in
بس
Gaza.
أسامة بضيف شغلة صغيرة كمان، إنه لا ينقص في غزة مراكز، لأنا شفت واحد من الأسئلة مراكز لعلاج الصدمة النفسية. لا ينقص في غزة مراكز للدعم النفسي، لكن مهما كانت حتى لو كانت بالمئات لن تكفي.
So, and Gaza itself does not have a shortage of mental health centers and clinic. They have a kind of a long history of dealing with traumas, but even if there were hundreds and hundreds of these centers, that's still not enough.
Thank you.
Thank you. شكرا محمد.
Thank you, Mohammed. This is really difficult to hear again, but I think also really important to hear and think about both not only the population of children and their families, because their mental health is linked to each other, but also our colleagues who are trying to support their mental health. And I think again there are some questions in the chat that we can pick up in afterwards, but I just wanted to point out something that I think is really important to remember when we, as a pediatrician, when we think about severe adversity and toxic stress and the impacts of psychological and the physical impacts that that trauma causes to children and to their growing bodies and their growing brains. These children are really good at adapting if we give them the conditions they need to heal and adapt. So this isn't a hopeless story. It's a question about making the trauma stop and making treatment and living conditions normal, acceptable, and creating the conditions to help these children and their families to heal. And if we do that, then we really can help. So I say this because I very frequently hear people asking about trauma and about psychological problems, and it's important to remember that healing is possible, but we have a lot we need to do to make that happen. Okay, thank you so much, and there's more to come. Next, I'd like to invite Ms. Budour Hassan. She is a Palestinian feminist, writer, and researcher. She's an Amnesty International's Middle East and North Africa researcher, and investigates and documents human rights violations in Israel and Palestine. She is one of the co-authors of Amnesty International's landmark report, You Feel Like You Are Subhuman, Israel's Genocide Against Palestinians in Gaza, published on the 5th of December, 2024. You can find that on the Amnesty International website. Before joining Amnesty, she worked as a legal researcher and advocacy officer at the Jerusalem Legal Aid and Human Rights Center, where she authored the first comprehensive report on Israel's policy of withholding the bodies of deceased Palestinians. As a freelance writer, she writes in Arabic and English on issues ranging from everyday life under occupation and apartheid to disability rights, women's rights, South-South solidarity, and she studies law and philosophy and is extremely and unapologetically biased against injustice, as am I. Thank you, Budour, for joining us today, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you. It's really hard to follow on everything that was said. I would just ask not to start from 2023, but rather a year earlier in 2022. From 5 August to 7 August 2022, Israel launched a limited so-called offensive on Gaza, and it only lasted 3 days. And just before the truce, on the 3rd day of the assault, 5 children who were visiting a cemetery in Fallujah, in Jabalia refugee camp, while they were playing near the cemetery, they were bombed by a drone. Israel at first denied responsibility, and then we identified the small missile that hit the children, killed 5 children. The 6th child who was with them, Amir Abu al-Ma'za, survived, but shrapnel remained in his body. And while documenting that strike, I recall talking to his father at the time, and he said something that stayed with me. He said, "My son survived by chance, by a miracle. I don't know whether we'll survive again. How long will this continue to happen?" And I'm just mentioning this because even when we count 5 words, this offensive is not mentioned. Usually, doesn't even make it to the calendar of wars that has punctuated the lives of people in Gaza, including 2023, even before the genocide. There was another so-called limited offensive in May 2023, which also killed children and inflicted life-changing disabilities on children as well. Obviously, recognizing that there has been a long history of such wars in Gaza, and in fact in Palestine, where since even before 1948, this has been a reality which is anything but normal for Palestinians, particularly for Palestinian children. And we've always spoken on so many occasions about the unchilding of Palestinian children, how they are deprived of even living their proper childhood, about how parents have to change, to act differently, to try to make their children forget, but they don't have the luxury. But I think nothing really prepared Palestinians for what's been unfolding since October 2023. And I'm saying has been unfolding because even though now the bombs have stopped, the life conditions, and I will now talk about genocide and why we are saying what's happening with genocide and how it has specific impact on children. But the conditions of life that Israel inflicted on Palestinians, which are calculated to bring about their physical destruction in whole or in part, are continuing to impact Palestinians. And with the complete siege on Gaza for the past 11 days, including cutting off electricity to the last functioning desalination plant, the denial of entry of any type of aid or even commercial trucks, including medicine, water, food, fuel, threatens to exacerbate the already catastrophic conditions of life. For children, the 3 acts that Amnesty documented constituting acts prohibited under the Genocide Convention were killing members of the group, causing them bodily or mental harm. Dr. Muhammad talked about the mental harm, and also deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction. Dr. Mimi also spoke about these conditions, especially destruction. This included denial of life-saving aid, destruction of critical infrastructure, including homes, roads, hospitals, healthcare facilities, and also mass displacement under inhumane conditions, repeatedly, forcibly displacing more than 90% of Gaza's population, up to a point where over 85% of all of Gaza was covered by so-called evacuation orders, which are actually displacement orders. And all these acts affected children particularly, not only directly, but also in relation to how they affected their parents. So we have been documenting strikes in which whole families were wiped out. And it wasn't just something that happened once or twice. It happened repeatedly over such an extended period of time, and the severity, scale, seriousness, repeated nature of such attacks also helped us infer the intent element from the pattern of conduct of Israel, which was so deliberate, so calculated, so planned and orchestrated that you cannot attribute it to a bug or coincidence or simply negligence or disregard for civilians' life. It was much, much more than disregard. It was deliberate annihilation, not only of life, but of everything that could have sustained life. So talking about the destruction of entire families, so often while documenting, we'd find families, the entire family killed, only one child who survived. Entire families that killed. We spoke with parents who lost whose entire families were killed, including all of their children. And I think also one of the things that you see, especially when you read the names of those killed, usually in Gaza and in Palestine, people name their children after their parents, either their mothers or their fathers. And when you look at the list of the names, you'd see the grandfather's name, the father's name, and then the child's name, and you see the names repeating, and it's like a family tree that had been uprooted completely. And again, these attacks, the latest attack that we started documenting is actually in Mashru' Beit Lahia, an attack on Abu Nasr family. Of the 134 civilians, all of them are civilians who were killed in one strike at 4:30 a.m. And the timing, by the way, is also one of the circumstantial evidence that we use to infer intent, because many of these attacks took place late at night or early dawn when people had no ability to flee. They were not given any warning, and the homes were extremely crowded. In that specific building, Abu Nasr family building in Mashru' Beit Lahia in the north of the Gaza Strip, 244 people were staying in one building because they were seeking safety and they were huddling together and they couldn't leave. Of those, 134 people were killed. This included 59 children. 59 of all of the 134 civilians killed were children. Many of those who did survive are having to live with life-changing disabilities. With Israel's continued imposed restrictions on Gaza and the destruction of the healthcare system in the north of the Gaza Strip, the northern governorate, which includes Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, and Jabalia refugee camp, there is not a single functioning major hospital at the moment. The 3 main hospitals were destroyed. Many of the doctors were detained arbitrarily or forcibly disappeared, including the 2 directors of 2 hospitals, Ahmed Mhanna, the director of the Al-Auda Hospital, and Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya, the director of Kamal Udwan Hospital. The closest hospital is in Gaza City, and with no transport, people have to walk sometimes carry their children on their shoulders. The conditions, because the treatment is not available as a result of the destruction and damage to hospitals. The other part is that Israel continues to impose restrictions on children who want to leave Gaza to receive life-saving aid. And this has been recurrent even before the current genocide. Imposed restrictions on children, either sometimes it's not the child herself who is denied aid, but her parents or her father or her mother, which means that the child can't live on their own. The bureaucracy that used always to be an obstacle for children to receive medical treatment outside Gaza is now hellish to deal with. Added to that, obviously, the additional concern of people afraid of leaving Gaza because they may not be allowed back again, which is a legitimate and real concern that many are having. In addition, in terms of mental and bodily harm as an act constitutive of genocide, Dr. Mohammed spoke about the mental impact, the long-standing mental impact on children having to witness firsthand the death of their loved ones, including their siblings, their parents, their best friends, to live that, to talk about that, to live things that no child should ever live. There is also, we have documented several cases of children as young as 14 who were forcibly disappeared or detained from Gaza arbitrarily just because they happened to be at a place, and then severely tortured in detention camps inside Israel. And when they returned, when they were released without charges or trial, some of them were held under the unlawful combatants law. Children transformed into unlawful combatants. When they went back to Gaza, they didn't even know where their parents were because they were first to go back to the south while their parents were in the north. So the torture to which Palestinian children were subjected is also part of the both bodily and mental harm, the life-changing injuries that Palestinians are subjected to, including amputations, including losing their sight, including also long-term impact on their ability to live a normal life ever again. Even before the genocide, this has been a major issue, especially after the March of Return between 2018 and 2019, where over 200 people in Gaza had at least one limb amputated. Now, with this, obviously, the issues of amputations have significantly grown. Gaza will have a community, a growing community of people who will have to live with life-changing disability. And finally, just on conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group. Children have been particularly affected by this, as Dr. Mimi spoke about the severe malnutrition to which Palestinian children were impacted and inflicted in Gaza. But there is also the issues of, even if they recover, they will have to face debilitating effects that will continue to live with them, unfortunately, maybe forever. And the displacement, the effect of displacement on children, having to flee their home all over again, something that many children said that they don't even know what home is, what safety even looks like, because they have to run so many times, including even living on tents near the beach, including never having to live near garbage dumps, including the pollution and the fear, the constant fear and anxiety that they have to deal with as a result of the continuing genocide. And finally, I just would like to, and I know this is about children, and we always, and understandably, talk about children because of their vulnerability, and the vulnerability of children, including children who were not able to receive proper care and support, is something that is one of the features of this genocide. But also men. And we always say children, women, but as if we're denying the civilianness of men by default in Gaza. Which is cruel, which is also racist and stereotypical, but also part of, unfortunately, as a human rights organization, what we usually do when we want to document and say, when we start documenting to confirm whether there was militants, whether there was so-called legitimate military target, one of the questions we ask, we kind of drop the children and women usually, and we start investigating, has this man been a military? So we also fall in this trap, unfortunately, by virtue of the type of work that we do, and by virtue of the fact that our investigation has to follow IHL boundaries. But I'm ending with a testimony from a father, Ahmed Nasman, whose wife and 3 children were killed in December in an attack on Rafah. They fled Gaza city to Rafah seeking safety. All the time he tried to joke with his children to make them not think about the checkpoint, because they had to move through the then so-called Mitsarim checkpoint. And he took so many pictures with them because it was his job to take pictures of his children. And he went to buy them groceries, and he went back, and the home was destroyed, bombed. His wife, all of his 3 children, the eldest aged 5, the youngest aged just 3 months, were killed in the attack. And he only managed to register the death of his children. He only went to the Ministry of Health to register the death of his children several months later. And I asked him about the delay. And he said, I kept hoping that somehow they are still alive. I didn't want to believe that they're no longer alive. And he said, he asked, I want nothing but to have my children back. Could you bring my children back? Of course, nobody can bring Ahmed's children back, nor his wife. But what I think we can do, and hopefully we can also push you, every one of us, to do, is to fight as hell using the tools that we have, limited as they are, in order so at least we can bring justice to Ahmed and his children. And as Dr. Mimi said, end impunity. Because this would not have happened had Israel not enjoyed full impunity for the past over 75 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Budour. Don't think it's difficult to respond to this or to follow up on this. There are no words but when this happens to and it shouldn't happen to any child or any family. But justice, I think this is justice, and also finding ways to help. What we'd like to do is to help people be aware that this is happening. So thank you for sharing that. That is the first step. I would like to invite all of the panelists to join, come back on screen, and we have quite a few questions, so we can maybe just go straight away into a Q&A session. And we have, I think, I will prioritize questions for Budour and for Mimi to begin with, since they have to leave slightly early. Maybe actually one of the earlier questions, there are a couple of questions from Mimi about quadcopters and also the role of the media in being complicit in allowing this to happen. So the question about quadcopters was actually quite technical. I don't know if you can answer this, but it was a question about whether they are controlled by a person or if they were automatically controlled like a robot. Quadcopter. And the other question was really asking you to expand on the impact and the role of the Western media in what's happening to children in Gaza.
Yeah, I think as far as the quadcopters go, obviously I'm not a munition expert, and quadcopters were reported from witnesses, and I saw someone's comment in there about, how is this a fact? And again, I will stress again that this was what we did commonly. Our practice was to ask the witnesses that brought the patients in what happened, and they would every single time say quadcopter or sniper. And a quadcopter, from what I understand, is 2-part, and it's obviously never seen this, but it is controlled by artificial intelligence, but then also a person on the end of it deciding to take the shot. And this is just what I've discussed with IDF soldiers, that what they knew about it in the past, and what they experienced. So I'm not a munition expert again, but this is from what I understand and the reading I've done about it. And then as far as Western media goes, the narrative that Western media perpetuates, specifically about the impunity that Israeli government has, they are never held accountable for any actions that they take. When I was in Gaza, I would frequently follow what was going on in the Western media to see if what was actually happening, what I was witnessing, was being reported. And just like now, it's not even making the news anymore. And there are dire conditions still happening in Gaza. None of that is ever exposed. None of that is ever shared with the Western world. And it's very one-sided. And that's what I refer to when I say Western media is complicit.
Thank you. And I think there's another question that is often speaking about media as well, because this is reported in the media as well, and I think many people wonder about it. And this question would be for both Budour and Mimi. And that is, so there's, in humanitarian aid, the way that aid is delivered is by large, and certainly the NGOs that I've worked for, is very carefully delivered in a way to try and minimize any chance that the resources can be taken by combatants. And there have been questions raised about looting and resource just acquisition of the humanitarian aid by Hamas. And I was wondering if either of you have any evidence of that, or to the contrary, to respond to these queries.
I could just tell you what I witnessed when I was there. Over and over again, I witnessed targeting of the people who were trying to secure the aid from coming in. So there would be aid workers that were hired as security guards to protect the aid from coming in, and they were shot repeatedly by snipers. They were shot by quadcopters, and they came in regularly. We saw that at Al-Aqsa the last time I was there. Never did we actually see people shot when they were looting. The looters were never shot or targeted, but the people protecting the aid, the civilians, they were always targeted by the Israeli military. And that to me just poses a question as to why. And an implicit is that in that is what is actually happening when that aid is actually trying to be, and these were young men with families that were protecting the aid from coming in, and they were shot for no reason. And so, I will pose that question out to the audience. What do you gather from that?
I'll just add other examples. Let's start by, and this is very important, even if there is diversion of aid, that does not justify collectively punishing the entire population and denying life-saving aid. So even if we take that hypothesis, that does not justify imposing full siege. And even if it's that there is chaos and there are different types of looting in Gaza happening, significant part of it happened because of the measures imposed by Israel. And significant part of it happened because, as Mimi said, of the targeting of those who were trying to secure aid and the breakdown of the law and order system, which is very natural to happen in every war. It happens everywhere in the world. Even that Israel as the occupying power, and since Israel has always occupied Gaza, by the way, even after it unilaterally withdrew, this level of control has significantly increased since the 7th of October. Instead of being responsible and fulfilling its obligations as the occupying power to secure and make sure that aid is delivered safely and is distributed safely, Israeli forces have always failed to do that. And again, there were alternatives that if the reason why they are blocking, and I'll just give one example. So a couple of days ago, Israeli energy minister decided that they're cutting off the electricity to the only functioning desalination plant, the water desalination plant in Gaza. So this desalination plant was only reconnected to electricity, the electricity grid inside Israel, which is, by the way, paid for by the Palestinian Authority. It's not something that Israel gives Palestinians pay for the electricity that comes from Israel. This Israel only agreed to reconnect the desalination plant in Deir al-Balah to the electricity grid inside Israel after months and months of delays. And then more months were required to repair relevant lines. And with this desalination plant, Israel cannot say, for example, that there is a possibility that the fuel would be diverted, because the electricity only exclusively serves the desalination plant. It cannot be used by anyone. Israel knows that not a single watt that goes to this desalination plant can go to anything else other than the desalination plant. And despite that, on Sunday, the Israeli energy minister announced that they were cutting again disconnecting this water desalination plant from the electricity grid in Israel, which would force this this desalination plant, which used for the 4 months that it was able to refunction fully again, used to produce 18,000 cubic meters of drinking water a day. Now this will be reduced by to 3,000, so only 1/6 of its capacity. For no reason. There is no diversion. Israel cannot even argue diversion of aid. No one can take this electricity with the exception of the desalination plant. And this happened on so many other occasions when Israel knew that there was no possibility of that aid to be diverted. And they also knew that had the aid that was, and at no point, even when so-called Israel claimed that it was increasing the entry of aid, at no point was aid enough. So even if we take into account diversion, the aid that was entering was so limited. And again, the weaponizing, not only of aid, but also food, water, and fuel. And then the claim that this is diverted without failing to offer evidence for that, and failing to substantiate that, to claim that it is as significant as Israeli authorities have been claiming, has been really something that, unfortunately, the media allowed this narrative to flourish for so many times. And there has not been a single challenge to Israeli claim. I have not seen so far a single article that's saying, why has Israel refused to reconnect Gaza to electricity when they can control with hospitals, they can connect hospitals. Technically, it's possible to the electricity grid because Palestinians pay for that. It's deduced from the taxes that the Palestinian Authority pays. So why Israel is refusing to allow that? Why is Israel refusing to allow medicine in? Including, we're not only talking about so-called dual-use objects that they are denied. At the moment, obviously, everything is denied entry. So, unfortunately, as with so many other narratives, there is this narrative that the Israeli military proposes, including on the attacks on hospitals, the attack on healthcare workers, the detention of healthcare workers, and the response, instead of journalists challenging the Israeli military, where is your evidence that there were militants there? Where you have, it's the burden of proof on you. There is a shifting of the burden of proof.
Thank you, Budour. That's very poignant. And I think that is probably the key, isn't it? The burden of proof and showing, and this is what we're trying to do also with this webinar, to make it clear what's happening to children here and with evidence for it. And on that note, actually, there's a question about unchilding, or sort of taking children's childhood before birth. So Mimi, mentioned the excessively high rates of spontaneous abortions and miscarriages, and also, though, what happens to children as they observe and experience, they witness and experience and are subjected to traumas, what this does to their own understanding of themselves and the loss of their childhood. I think I'm aware that both Mimi and Budour will need to leave soon, so if we can start with them, and then Mohammad, you can talk a little bit after. Thank you.
I was going to address the 300%. That the statement that I made about that is that there is a 300% increase. So if I just use simple math, just to explain it, I think because that's what it was more of a technical question of how is 300% possible. So if there were 10 people who had a miscarriage, or 10 women who had a miscarriage before October 7th, now that rate is 30. So that's what that means when someone says 300%, that's what that means. That's just I don't know who asked the question, but that's the explanation of the math. But there is a direct, I was giving the example of the women that I saw with preterm labor. And that was mostly what we saw. And the women that I talked to, it was, things like hypoxia because the oxygen is so low due to the bomb residuals in the air, the heavy metals that have been deposited as a result of this into the ground, into the water. Women are malnourished and aren't able to sustain a full pregnancy. And then that is taking effect into the infant if the infant makes it, they can't produce breast milk to feed the baby. And the nutritional requirements of a preterm infant are much higher. And there's special formula that's needed many times. None of that was available at the time. And if it made it in, it was extremely expensive. And so mothers could not afford to feed their children. And that's what we saw was, women feeding their babies sugar water. And that's obviously not compatible with a newborn's life. And we would see many times children coming in with failure to thrive and long-term illnesses as a result of it.
Yeah, maybe on unchilding, and obviously Dr. Mohammed is the expert on that, especially the psychological aspect on that. There are two types of unchilding that we tend to witness in Palestine. First of all, the reality of occupation, apartheid, and now genocide, that it deprives Palestinian children from living their anything close to normal childhood, even when there are no bombs. Just the everyday life under occupation is never normal. It's never normal. So there is always the fear of being arrested, detained, tortured, humiliated at a checkpoint. This is something that lingers. It haunts all Palestinian children to the extent that they themselves treat themselves as adults. They are treated as adults, and the Israeli military treats them as adults. But especially in Gaza, the chores that Palestinian children have to perform, including waiting for hours on queue for clean water, carrying water on their backs to bring it to the family. The fact that they have, for the second year in a row, also not been able to attend school properly. The fact that some of the children are now the sole breadwinners for their families, and we're talking about 12, 13-year-old boys and girls. The changes that happen to their life, the change of the family dynamic, on many occasions, no existence of family. The children who are now caregivers, we have children who are caregivers for their younger children. So all of these roles that children have to assume under genocide just to survive have unchilded them. And the second form of unchilding is how we tend to speak about Palestinian children, especially the media, and including Palestinian boys. So I hear a lot the word minor. There is no such thing as minor. There is child. Any boy under the age of 18 is a child. He's not a minor. So when we say male minors or young male teenagers about Palestinians who are detained by Israel when they're 16, 17, instead of calling them as they should be called, children. On the other hand, a soldier, an Israeli soldier, who is 19 or 20, when the international media reports on them, they almost speak about them as if they were children. So it's the absolute reverse. We see the soldier is treated as a children, infantilized, while the Palestinian children are unchilded, are turned into teenagers, minors, anything but not to say that they are children. Including the 14-year-old boy I talked about who was detained for more than 23 days and then returned with signs of torture on their bodies. So the norm, the way that this has been accepted for so long, when we reference with the terminology, it's the additional layer of unchilding. In addition to the occupation, there is the meta-narrative that about how we talk about Palestinian children.
Thank you, Budour. I think this understanding, and this is one of the big problems that humanitarian organizations are also facing, is helping people to realize that Palestinian children are children. There's a question. The question, I'd like to read it for Mohammed for you, because it's very clear. It's about asking to help further comprehend the accumulation of unchilding from before birth and reproductive genocide and how the brutality is embodied, and what is the psychological toll and beyond.
أسامة لو ممكن توضح لي السؤال؟
فبتسأل عن فكرة انتزاع الطفولة من الأطفال بغزة، وكيف استمرارية انتزاع الطفولة من يعني من لما يخلقوا لحد ما يستمروا،
تمام.
يعني عشان العنف الفظيع اللي بيتعرضوا له، وكمان الريبرودكتيف جينوسايد، الإبادة الإخصابية أو الولادية اللي عم بتصير بغزة، فكيف تراكمها على مدار الوقت وكيف ممكن نتعامل
أول
معها.
إشي أول إشي كتير مهم نفهم إنه القطع الطفولة وتطور الطفولة عند الأطفال في غزة ليس بجديد. هاي مهم إن نذكرها، ما بلشش من 7 أكتوبر.
ايش اول كلمة قلتها بس عشان
إنه قطع التطور تاع الطفولة، انه نعمل كات للتطور تاع الطفوله. هسه بحكي عنها لانه الصدمه النفسيه اللي عم بتصير للاطفال في غزه هي عامل كثير كبير لقطع الاستمراريه تاع تطور الطفل.
yeah. So
وهي
the
مش موجوده من
unchild
7 اكتوبر، موجوده من سنوات قديمه جدا، من 18 سنه، من وقت الانفصال، من وقت الحصار.
Yeah. So the unchilding that children in Gaza face, and the kind of disruption and interruption of their childhood is not new. It has existed ways before, since the siege on the Gaza Strip, and maybe before, and the trauma to the children plays a crucial role in that unchilding.
عمليا الحرب والحصار والتجويع والقتل هو يمنع تطور الطفل في التطور السليم تاعه، إن كان ذهنيا وإن كان عاطفيا وإن كان سلوكيا.
So the continuous siege and starvation and the ongoing the different wars on the Gaza Strip completely interrupt the normal course of childhood in children, also behaviorally, like on a behavioral level, on an emotional level, on a psychological level, and so on.
طبعا هذا التأثير تاعه احنا راح نبلش نحسه مش إسا. التأثير تاعه راح نبلش نحسه في المجتمع، في كل المجتمع الفلسطيني في داخل غزة بعد ما تستقر الأوضاع. والتأثير تاعه بده يكون مجتمعي اجتماعي في داخل غزة.
So, and the effects of this unchilding and of this continuous trauma will not only be felt right now; it will be felt years into the future as these children go, and it will affect the entire society in Gaza.
أي شخص بمرقش في مراحل تطور الطفل الطبيعية لإله جميعها في المستقبل راح يكون، إذا ما أخذش التدخل المناسب لإله في المستقبل، راح يكون إنسان معيق للمجتمع، مش إنسان بيساعد على تطور المجتمع.
So any person who throughout his childhood did not experience the full, did not go through the different cycles of healthy and normative childhood, when they grow to become adults, they become some sort of a burden on society and are less productive to in the social construct, unless they are unless there's appropriate intervention.
كثار منا بشوفوا أطفال غزة عم بيحكوا وبينبسطوا، بقولوا طلعوا ما أحلى حكيهن زي الكبار، لكن ما بنعرف إنه هذا الحكي اللي زي الكبار هو ضرر كثير كبير، وتأثير الصدمة النفسية على الولد مش يعني نكبر الطفل ولازم يعيش الطفولة تاعيته، ما يتحول لبالغ. وإحنا ما بدنا أطفال اللي يحكوا زي البالغين، بدنا أطفال يضحكوا ويلعبوا زي الأطفال.
So a lot of us, kind of on a very instinctive level, we're sometimes happy when we see children in Gaza, and how we see, look, they're speaking like adults. They really speak entire sentences, they speak the same concepts that adults speak. But this is nothing to be, and they become mature in that sense. But this is nothing to be happy about, because we want children in Gaza to speak like children, not to speak like adults. I
وهاي
think that
نقطة كثير
means that
مهم،
when we
هاي
see
نقطة
this as
كثير
a
مهم
sign of power,
ننتبه
Hmm?
النقطة اللي كتير مهم ننتبه لها، لأنه هاي واحدة من القضايا، التدخل الأساسية في الصدمة النفسية مع الأطفال، وهي واحدة من التأثيرات النفسية العميقة للأطفال في غزة، إن بنحولهن لبالغين وهن ما بملكوا مراحل الطفولة.
So this is a crucial point because this is not a sign of strength when they start speaking like adults in this strength. This is not a sign of power and strength. It's one of the forms of unchild. We don't want them to be adults. We want them to live their childhood as it should.
يعني الطفل اللي يضطر انه لكيلومترات يحمل كلانة مي، وطفل انه يضطر لساعات اسا في رمضان يقف عشان ياخذ الوجبة تاعيت الافطار، هاي حصانة نفسية، هاي تعذيب، وهي اجرام اخر ضد الاطفال في غزة.
So a child that has to walk for miles and miles just to carry, gallons of water for his family, or now in Ramadan, a child that has to wait in line for hours until he gets a meal. This is not resilience and strength. This is torture and criminality inflicted on children.
يعني لما بنت صديقتي في غزة الصحفية عم بتقولها امبارح، وبنعرف حاليا وضع التغذية في غزة ايش هو، بتقولها يما انا بحاجة للحمة، انا اشتقت للحمة. هاي هي الطفولة اللي بندور عليها، ان الطفل يطلع الطفولة تاعيته، مش الطفل يجي ويقول انا انسان صبور وبقدر اعيش، بقدر اكون بدون ما اكلش لحمة لاشهر.
Mm. So, and one of the daughters of his friend in Ghazi who said, quite honestly and clearly, I want meat. I miss the taste of meat. And this is this is an expression of childhood versus children who say, no, I shall overcome. We can tolerate this, and I don't need meat. This, hardship will pass, and so on, and trying to really show the strength and resilience of adults.
عشان نرجع الصلابة النفسية والحصانة النفسية لأطفال غزة، بالمحصل لازم نرجع لهم الطفولة تاعيتهم، نقطة. نرجع لهم الطفولة تاعيتهم باللعب، بالضحك، بالحياة.
So if we want to give back the strength and resilience to the children of Gaza, we need to bring them back their childhood. They're simply the simple acts of childhood, just the ability to laugh and play around and to live a normal and healthy life. شكرا.
Shukran, thank you. On that note, actually, one of the questions also was asking a little bit about healing after trauma, and healing after severe adversity and multiple adversity. And I think for those in the medical field, this is what we call toxic stress, and how it has really globally pervasive impacts on the body and the nervous systems and the development of children. And you see it manifest in different ways, and it has a whole set of health risks, both physical health risks and mental health risks throughout life. So this follows children through their life course. But what we have found, and when you look in the toxic stress literature, so if you search in the literature for toxic stress in childhood, most of it is studies that are done in high income settings. Most of it is actually from the US, and then also Europe. But increasingly, there are some studies in conflict settings, and we know in conflict settings quite a bit of work has been done to understand what protects and mitigates, and exactly what Mohammad was talking about, giving them their childhood back, stopping the violence, taking away what's harming them, and putting support structures, especially things like routine and predictability. So they need to know that they're going to have food and water every day. They need to know their parents are safe. They're actually quite often more scared about their parents than they are about themselves. And so if you look in literature around conflict and interventions to support children in conflict, you will see this is why humanitarian response is often setting up not only safe spaces and child-friendly or adolescent-friendly spaces, but also sort of informal schools or rehabilitating schools, so children can go to school. It's more than learning. It's actually this return to normality and a structure in the day that's really, really important for healing. And if we do that, these children who have been very pervasively harmed can actually heal and get beyond this or come through this. It won't ever go away, but they can heal and thrive afterwards. And I think it's really important to remember that that we have a responsibility to make that possible, starting with making people aware that this is happening. There are a number of a lot of questions coming through. So, Mohammed, there's one about, there's two similar ones around the concepts of trauma and also this colonial approach to thinking about what trauma is and a colonial approach to responding. And now, when there are health workers that are really suffering as well, but there's also a lack of there's a unreliable aid right now. It's actually completely halted. But also the way we treat, what can we do to treat, and do you have ideas for how we need to shift the way we think about responding to psychological impacts, mental health impacts on children and families?
ف...
السؤال اللي بعت لي اياه مظبوط اللي من سمعنا. اوكي. Bene, l'avrei potuto dire in italiano, visto che quella che ha fatto la domanda è italiana, بس بحكي بالعربي. إذا إحنا لا ننظر إلى الصدمة النفسية من منظور تحرري، بمعنى الفهم العميق لإيش هو المجتمع الغزاوي ولظروف الحياة اللي بيعيشها وللظروف للتاريخ اللي ورثه في صدمة نفسية ورثناها إحنا الفلسطينيين وفي غزة لسه أكثر. إذا ما بيكون هاي الاستمرارية بالفهم تاع الصدمة النفسية على مدار السنين، نحن لا نستطيع أن نتدخل في الصدمة النفسية بغزة. هاي أولاً.
So we cannot truly and meaningfully intervene in trauma in Gaza without really, first of all, having a liberation psychology framework and understanding the history and geography of Gaza and of all of the question of Palestine, basically, and the transgenerational trauma that has been inherited from one generation to the other. So this is the only way we can truly engage in a meaningful way with treating trauma in Gaza.
أنا بدي أعطي مثال بعيد شوي عن غزة، عن اللاجئين السوريين في اليونان. لما كنا نتدخل كهيومانيتي كرو مع اللاجئين السوريين في اليونان، السلطات اليونانية كانت تجيب أخصائيين نفسيين يونانيين يتدخلوا مع اللاجئين هناك، والضرر اللي كانوا يعملوه لأنهم ما عندهم الفهم العميق لإيش يعني الحضارة العربية والحضارة السورية. العدم فهمهم كانوا يعملوا ضرر أكثر بكثير ما يعملوا إفادة. فكثير مهم نكون حذرين. كل المؤسسات الأجنبية والأوروبية اللي بدها تتدخل في غزة وبدها تدرب في غزة، نكون حذرين في أي نوع تدريب نعطي، في أي أدوات نعطي. هل نعطي الأدوات الغربية اللي هي منقطعة كليا عن الواقع الغزاوي، اللي هي تتعامل مع الصدمة كأنها إشي أوروبي، ولد وقع عن بوسكليت وانجرحت إجره؟
So from his experience dealing with the Syrian refugees in Greece, working with humanity crew, he would see the difference that sometimes when European therapists would come in, they would sometimes even do more harm than good because they have a understanding of trauma that is completely colonial and completely detached from the reality of the war in Syria and and of Arabic idioms of distress, if we want to call it, and of Arabic history and culture. So it needs to be a kind of our engagement with any form of trauma needs to be locally rooted within the local context.
يعني المدربين الأوروبيين على سبيل المثال اللي بيصلوا غزة لتدريب الأخصائيين النفسيين الغزيين عن التدخل العائلي لتخفيف تأثير الصدمة النفسية. طب إيش مفهوم عن العائلة الغزية؟ إيش بيعرفوا عنه؟
Yeah, you see this with European mental health worker who come to Gaza to train psychologists about family resilience and dealing with stress within the family, but they have no idea of the kind of the Gazan family and the structure of it and its dynamics.
هاي من ناحية ثانية، كمان لا نستطيع أن ننزع إنسانيتنا ونظل بس بالمحل المهني.
And on
بمعنى
and on another level, we cannot dehumanize ourselves and continue just treating ourselves as professionals.
وإذا إحنا بدنا نحط الإنسانية تاعيتنا الإشي الأساسي والأولي قبل ما ندخل أي أداة علاجية أو أي أداة تدخل، إن نكون قريبين مع الناس نفهم إيش كيف بفكروا وكيف بحسوا. الشعور العربي أو الشعور الغزي بدي أسميه، لأنه صار في إشي بنقدر نسميه الشعور الغزي فيش منه بالعالم. الشعور الأوروبي لا، المشاعر الأوروبية لا تتطابق معاه. بعرفش
So if
كيف بدك
we
تترجمها هاي أسامة، شوي صعبة.
Yeah, so even if we want to start with the kind of centering our own humanity before centering our professional role while dealing with the trauma in Gaza, we need to really understand the psyche of like the Gazan psyche or the Palestinian psyche in that sense, and this is completely different from European or American even psyche and emotional understanding of the lived reality and the lived conditions.
يعني حتى أنا اليوم اللي عم بشوفه إنه في مشاعر صعبة جدا عم تطلع بالذات عند الأطفال في غزة، اللي لحد اليوم ما في إلها أسماء في قاموس المشاعر الأوروبية.
So what I'm witnessing right now is even these like very hard and intense emotions that I'm seeing from coming out from children in Gaza. There is no professional definition for it in the literature of psychology and trauma. We can't even capture it using the tools, the mainly European tools that we have.
يعني إيش بدنا نسميه للشعور أسامة تاع الأخصائية النفسية الغزية اللي خلفت وبعد 3 أيام كانت في المخيمات عم تعطي دعم نفسي لنساء غزيات، خلفت
So
وما عندهاش مقومات الحياة الأساسية هي نفسها.
so احنا قربنا نخلص محمد فبس بدي اللي
بس هاي
عندك
آخر جملة. هاي
Okay,
آخر
so
جملة.
so just as an example, how can we even grasp the idea of one of his friend who is a female healthcare worker, mental health worker in Ghazi, who after giving birth, 3 days after giving birth, was back in the tents in the refugee camps, providing working with the traumatized Gazan children. How can we even understand this installation? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
شكرا محمد.
Thank you, Shukran Muhammad. This is a really, I think this is a really good way also to finish this session, to think about how we need to shift the way we think about responding to support and also understanding what is happening for everyone, for children, also their families, and also the people that are health workers that are trying to support them. Thank you very much. This has been a very difficult webinar, but I think very important. And I know that there are many questions we have not managed to answer or address. If you there's an email address that everyone will have received when they got confirmation for registration for the webinar. So if you have further questions or comments or something you want to share, then please do go ahead and reach out and send your thoughts or questions there. And thank you everyone for participating, and thank you to Mohammed and to Mimi and Budour who are gone, and to Dr. Tanus for your wonderful translation.